Hello, this is C. Marshall, and this is my review of Bloodborne. This video contains sporadic spoilers from pretty much the entire game. Now, this isn't a unique statement, but I adore the Souls games. And just like a lot of people, the release of a new one is a pretty huge deal for me. So keep that in mind while watching this review, as it's coming from someone who enjoys these games very much. Saying that, Bloodborne is an absolute thrill. A masterful, focused, and intricately detailed experience. First off, the world design is second to none, whose cohesiveness brings about a lot of accusations of repetition, which is just not the case. The more time spent with the game, the more impressive it becomes. Large locations having breathtaking and occasionally subtle style shifts, with a musical ebb and flow. Victorian cityscapes lead to forests with hidden caves filled with acidic liquid. It slowly escalates the madness to match the loosely told story, culminating in the dream worlds, which are these wild areas dedicated to the psychedelic stuff often only found in small secret areas in the old Souls games like the Ash Lake. And all of this stuff makes sense in the context the game provides. For the most part, they all wind through each other, with surprising shortcuts popping up all over the place. And this was a huge problem with Dark Souls 2, the lack of sense behind the construction of the world. Bloodborne does not suffer from this, and every place you are, you can pretty much see where you're coming from and where you're headed next. There are a few disappointing dead ends, though. After killing some massive boss, it was a little upsetting to enter some tiny room, grab an item, and then just turn around to trudge back. But it's mostly awesome, a great mixture of foreboding but inviting, familiar but alien. You feel like some of the building designs wouldn't be so out of place in the real world, but there's just something slightly off. The sense of dread is thick, probably more so than any other game in the Souls series. The main themes of this game are more in line with Lovecraftian horror than fantasy. It lends itself to the gameplay nicely, with a good balance of large open areas with a ton of enemies, to narrow, claustrophobic corridors. Thankfully, the game rarely throws enemies at you in circumstances that aren't conducive to its quick combat. Dark Souls and Demon Souls often found you pinging your sword off the walls while facing quick enemies in narrow corridors. A frustrating design choice that's been thankfully toned down. Sadly, the level setups still occasionally allow for the series' patented doorway cheating, although less so than beforehand. One enemy, a large spider, has a hilarious moveset that seems to be built around killing you while attempting to get him stuck in a doorway. The world is nicely interactive on top of all of this. Pots and boxes shatter when you swing and roll, bringing a viscerality to the combat beyond the massive sprays of blood and screams of your enemies. It's great, if not a little unnecessary, given the game's already shaky performance. And this is kind of a problem for me. The graphics are absolutely spectacular and wonderfully detailed, but the performance is a mess at times. I honestly feel like all this attention to the game's graphical prowess is more detrimental than anything and works against Bloodborne's systems. Quick combat needs spatial awareness, smooth movement, and a general lack of clutter, and that's just not found here. A lot of the bosses are covered in tattered cloth or diaphanous hanging flesh, and during crazy times the frame rate seems to drop below drinking age. This bothers me a lot less on console games because I usually am pretty far away from the TV, but this would be a goddamn dream at 60 frames a second. I'm assuming all this gorgeousness also brings about the atrociously long load times, which are a bigger problem than even the frame rates. I'm assuming you've heard about all this a million times though, so I'm not going to waste my breath much longer. The world feels and looks so good that I can be an apologist. Few games can evoke the feeling of being an adventurer like Bloodborne. By the end, you have this amazing feeling that you have crossed countless miles, seen incredible things, and really struggled to crawl across the finish line triumphantly. It's a remarkable journey. The enemy design is just as brilliant as the world design. The bosses are unbelievable and thankfully feature a host of massive and terrifying monsters instead of humanoids, even though you still run into a few. Some of them are genuinely revolting. The highlights of the designs were when the game got a little crazy. You'll encounter alien insects that shoot fireballs, human-sized fleas with bellies packed full of blood, and writhing piles of conjoined snakes. It's the kind of shit brought up from your deepest fears but never feels exploitive or cheap. They are outrageously creative. The Daughter of the Cosmos, a later boss, killed me a few times because I kept just trying to walk around and observe her. Beyond their designs, the enemies are also great fun to fight. Most of them have movesets to counter the player's speed, and I'm happy that they all force the player to act aggressively. Sadly, their variety is a bit inconsistent. It's bothersome because because after you finish the game, you have seen a ton of different enemy designs, but they aren't distributed very well. One of my favorite enemy designs is literally only fought once and never used again in the main game. This is mainly because of From Software's insistence on consistency in the world building. If an enemy doesn't make sense in a location, you won't be finding it there. This heightens the immersion, but harms the gameplay. I love the NPC fights though, which are fast and bloody as hell, often pitting the equipment you have earned against you. The equipment is varied. You won't be finding nearly as much stuff as compared to its brothers. There are a ton of changes to the formula, big and small. Rings have been replaced with runes, Estus flasks are now called blood vials and are a finite resource, and a lot of other things, but the weapons are the biggest and smartest change. The trick weapons are a wonderful idea, and they take the Soulsian dedication to making every weapon viable to the next level. Each one makes the player put their weapon abilities to use in different situations, each one begging to be mastered. It rewards creative and adaptable thinking in the best ways an action game can. A strange choice here is that most of the equipment drops are from the aforementioned NPC battles, and even then they aren't true drops, they're badges, which then make you purchase the weapons from a merchant. This damages my new game flow, adding another unnecessary hoop to jump through before getting the weapon I want. For example, after beating the game, I wanted to go back through and have a pure skill build, and I knew the exact weapon I wanted to do this with, the dual daggers. There aren't many weapons, but they are varied, and almost to the point where they seem to be built around specific builds, and these daggers that I wanted seem to be the ones most focused on the build I was after. So, I was an asshole, I killed a friendly character early, and got the badge I wanted. But then I remembered that the things cost 40,000 blood echoes, a huge amount of currency in the early game. Souls games usually cater to this kind of decision making, and here it was like I was being guided more strictly down a path than I was used to. Onward with this line of criticism, the boss battles have lost a lot of their weight when compared to the other games because they only gate progression, and rarely give rewards other than echoes and Chalice dungeon stuff. It's kind of a bummer bringing down these giants, expecting the usual card to come on screen announcing your loot, to see nothing. Thank God the combat is good enough to excuse these problems. It's less of a battle and more of a dance. And once your proficiency with it has peaked, there's nothing else like it. Jumping around your opponents, flamboyantly transforming your weapon, pecking away at large groups, it's empowering as hell. A wonderful choice in here is how the game's lock-on system functions. When freely moving the camera, you dodge in a role often found in the other Souls games. But when locked on, it changes into these quick little bursts. It seems to be a response to the criticism of most of these games about how the camera kinda screws with you when locked onto huge enemies. So now it naturally recommends you to keep the camera free when fighting large enemies, because the roll is so much better to dodge some huge sweeping attack, and a quick jump is better for some human-sized jab or swing. The combat is pure and deeply considered, but with this extreme focus and dedication to refinement, some of the options for challenge or novelty builds has been trimmed away. This is something that only caters to a subset of the gaming community, but it's still sad to see. The game's longevity is extended with New Game Plus offerings that have a unusually extreme ramp in difficulty. My level 90 character with a fully upgraded weapon still took like 4 or 5 hits to kill the first enemies you encounter. This isn't really a complaint, it's just a warning for those who want to keep feeling like a badass when starting New Game Plus, because you won't. But with this decision to have the scaling so intense with enemy health and damage, I wish they would have allowed for further progression, something like the replacement of low-level upgrade materials with higher ones, or at least higher hard caps on levels. Also offered is the Chalice dungeons, which kind of help this problem I was just talking about. They're a randomized series of dungeons with surprisingly complex systems. Throughout the game, you'll find what amount to ingredients. Some of these are obtained without really searching, others are harder to find. These allow you to enter the dungeons and progress down an entirely new path, and encountering constantly changing layouts. I was shocked by how much I enjoyed this addition. It transcends its gimmicks and offers up new ways to sharpen your combat skills and find special items or equipment. These start off incredibly slowly and often only reward the patient. Bloodborne is a big game. It's a huge game, and it's probably the best one I've played so far in this generation. It asks for the player's entire attention, bringing you into its sprawling world. And more than any other games in its family tree, it asks you just to look around, feel your surroundings, the decaying wood, the moss-covered stones, the rotting corpses all placed with an unmatched deliberation. Its combat is refined, its lore is rich, and its world is detailed. Bloodborne can really piss me off. and it isn't as hard-hitting or game-changing as playing Demon Souls was for the first time. And it has those performance issues. But when I sit back and think about it, it feels like a quiet masterpiece. It's that weird album where every song sounds the same at first, but eventually grows into one of your favorites. Each understated crescendo, surprising tempo change, and quiet solo becoming more and more impactful with maturity. Thank you so much for watching.